I'm Stephen O'Hara and I'm here today to tell a story about the beautiful Loughareema. And Loughareema is Ireland's vanishing lake. Now, the reason it vanishes is because the lake has a stream that runs through it, and as the stream flows and water builds up, it blocks the exit of the water and it fills up with water. So you could go across the mountain in the morning and the lake could be full, and you could go back in a few hours in the evening and the lake will have drained again as it is at the minute. And it's a very eerie sort of place here. On a beautiful morning like today, you wouldn't think it, but there's quite a lot of tragedy associated with Loughareema. And the story that I'm going to tell you about concerns Colonel John McNeill, who was retired British Army officer from the Royal Engineers. And he had family in Cushendall. He lived in Ballycastle, and he had been staying with his cousin, Captain Dan McNeill. And he was going to Ballycastle on the 30th of September 1898 to catch the 3 p.m. train. And it had been raining heavily for 3 days and 3 nights, and the lake was full to the brim. And at that time the road used to be much lower than it is today, and the lake had actually spilled out across the road and had submerged the road. Now, as he approached in a carriage with his driver, the driver decided that he was going to force the horses on through the water. They didn't realise just how deep it was, and they ploughed into 4 feet of water, and the cold of the water, when it reached the horses' bellies, made the horses shy and rear up. And the driver took his horsewhip and he struck the horse on the left, and that caused it to turn rapidly and violently into the horse on the right, and the 2 horses turned the carriage over, and they dragged it down over the hill here and down into the lake, into 20 feet of water. Now, Colonel McNeill was wearing a heavy gabardine overcoat, and as he was thrown from the carriage, the water just soaked into his coat and it acted like an anchor, and it pulled him down into the water. Now, nearby there was a witness. There was a man named McHenry, who was a road worker, and he had seen the accident happen, and he grabbed a stick and he ran to the water's edge. He couldn't swim, he couldn't go in and render aid like that, and he reached the stick into the water and he encouraged Colonel McNeill to swim towards him. And Colonel McNeill was a strong swimmer. He was a man of 61, but he was in good health, and he swam to within a couple of yards of the water's edge, and he almost reached the stick, but the water just pulled him under, and he was drowned, and his driver was drowned, and the horses were drowned. And there was a report in the Reading Mercury of the inquest just a couple of weeks later, and the witness McHenry gave evidence, and he said that the horses had pranced into the water, and he said he described his dismay at not being able to save Colonel John. Now, it's an idyllic place in daytime, in dry weather, but I can tell you, having lived here all my life, this is an eerie and spooky place at night, or during a snowstorm, or in rainfall. And there's something about the acoustics in the road, that the hills on each side, the peat hills, just soak up all the sound, and you can hear your own footsteps as you walk through. And people say that at night, if they're travelling and if the rain has been heavy and the lake is full, they say that they can hear the sound of horses whinnying against the hillsides and reverberating down the glen. And that's the story of Colonel John McNeill. He's not the only person to have died here. There was a bread man from Ballycastle, from Ballyvoy actually. There was a bread man from Ballyvoy, which is just 3 miles from here, and he was delivering bread to Cushendall. This is about 20 years after Captain. This is about 20 years after. If you start just from there was a bread man. There was a bread man whose name was Dan Scullion. And Dan lived in Ballyvoy, just about 3 miles from here, and he was delivering bread over the mountain to Cushendall during very heavy snowfall. And at the last house on his route, the housewife pleaded with him not to risk the mountain in such bad weather, to spend the night, and maybe the snow would be better in the morning, but he wanted home to his mother, and he ignored her pleadings, and he took his bread cart over the mountain, and when he got to here, he never made it home. Now, his body was not found for 4 days. The snow was so heavy, and his cart had been overcome by snow, and it was almost compacted and buried into a snowbank. 4 days later, after the whole community was out searching for him. They found his remains here at Loughareema. The weather was that bad at that time that the cattle market in Armoy had taken place, and farmers reported having to find their way home in the snow by dismounting from their horses and holding their horses' tails and allowing the horse to lead them through the snow. So it was a particularly bad year of snow. There was one other incident which concerns a doctor who was called from Ballycastle to go to Cushendall to a lady who was in labour and having difficulties, and he rode to Cushendall on a dog cart. It's a very small cart with a single horse, and when he examined the woman, he decided she needed to be hospitalised. So they put her in the cart and he headed off. And again, it had been raining particularly heavily, but the lake hadn't broken across the road. But when he reached here, his horse stumbled and it became a bit lame. One of its legs was not functioning properly, and he pulled over to the side of the road and he was frantic, worrying about how to get the woman to the hospital, when he spied a house nearby, and he went to the door of the house and he asked for help. And an old man came out and he said sure, and he took him into his little stable, and he had a pony, and he came out and they swapped the horses over and tied the slightly lame horse on behind the cart, and he headed off towards Ballycastle. But after a couple of minutes, the doctor said, "Here, this is not the right road to Ballycastle." And the old man said, "Well, it's the only road I know to Ballycastle." And in actual fact, where he was taking him was over the mountain, away in that direction, which was the road to Ballycastle before the road was built in 1842. There's a road here which we know as the Green Road, and you can still see the imprint of the road across the hill. And he led him into Ballycastle that way. Anyhow, they got to the hospital, the baby was safely delivered. The doctor went outside and the old man was gone. But his pony was still there, and so the doctor walked home with his pony and his own horse and his cart, and he stabled them. And in the morning when he went out, there was no pony there, only his own horse. And he went back to the hospital and he said, "Did any of you see the old man who helped me out last night?" And they said, "There was no old man." And he said, he lives in a wee house near Loughareema. He said, "There's no house near Loughareema." And he said, and he took me over an unfamiliar road. And he said, that road hasn't been used for decades. So the story goes that there was in fact a magic pony, and that the man had helped out the man had helped out the doctor and the lady in her time of need. And there's an additional local legend about that man who is reputed to live here, and that is that he only helps when a child is about to be born, and he will appear and he will come and offer aid, but that he only does it when the child to be born is going to be a great doctor. And history tells us that the baby that was born that night in fact went on to become one of the top surgeons in the Royal Hospital in Belfast. So we've got three very kind of spooky legends attached to the place, and I can assure you, as you come through here at night, or if you're on your own, you feel like pulling your coat a bit more tightly around yourself, and you're paying more attention to the sounds that you can hear, and you're always cautious for Colonel John McNeill, or the magic pony, or Dan Scullion. Those are the stories connected with Loughareema. Thanks.